What happens when the person sleeping next to you is a stranger? When every "I love you" was rehearsed? When the man who said children would ruin your life has four of them in another state? What does it feel like to turn 50 and realize that the last 20 years, every anniversary, every shared meal, every whispered promise in the dark, was nothing but an elaborate performance? Here's the question that should keep you up tonight. How many versions of the truth can exist in one marriage before reality collapses under the weight of the lies? This is not another story, but it's inspired by real patterns of deception that have destroyed families across America. Tonight, we're exploring what happens when betrayal isn't just emotional. It's financial, systematic, and calculated. Because the worst crimes aren't always violent. Sometimes they're the quiet devastations that happen over years in shared bank accounts and whispered lies. Welcome to Shocking Crime Stories. I'm Marvis Rivers, and this story will change how you think about trust. March 15, 2019. A luxury high-rise apartment in Columbus, Ohio. What started as an intimate 50th birthday celebration became a confrontation that would take 6 months to legally untangle. A woman arrived uninvited with 4 children, carrying a manila folder thick with evidence. Bank statements spanning 12 years, 2 marriage certificates with the same man's signature, birth records, mortgage documents, credit card bills. By 8:47 p.m., police were called, not for violence, but for something more insidious. Wire fraud, identity theft, systematic financial exploitation that had drained over $400,000 from multiple accounts across 2 states. The confrontation lasted 43 minutes. By the time it ended, joint accounts had been frozen, emergency restraining orders filed, and a man who'd successfully maintained 2 complete families in 2 different states for over a decade watched both lives implode simultaneously. No weapons were drawn, no physical altercations occurred, but what happened in that apartment that night was devastating in ways that transcend violence. This is a fictional dramatization of how one man's lies destroyed 2 women who never knew the other existed, until they were standing face to face, holding identical wedding photos, realizing they'd married the same man. If you love stories that twist, shock, and leave you questioning everything about trust and betrayal, hit that subscribe button now, because what you're about to hear could happen to anyone. Don't be the one caught off guard. Drop your city or country in the comments. Before we get to that apartment, before we talk about the moment 2 wives met each other for the first time, before we discuss how a man maintained 2 mortgages, 2 wedding anniversaries, 2 completely separate existences for over 10 years, we need to go back to where this really begins. Not with deception, not with lies, but with a little girl sitting in a Detroit public library after dark, waiting for her mother's factory shift to end, dreaming of a life where she'd never have to depend on anyone ever again. Let's call her Vivien. Vivien Rochelle Morrison was born February 22, 1969, at Detroit Receiving Hospital on a Wednesday morning when her mother, Lorraine, was just 19 years old and terrified. Lorraine had been working at a department store, folding sweaters and smiling at customers who looked through her like she was invisible. She met Vivien's father, a smooth-talking assembly line worker named Raymond, who promised her the world and disappeared 3 months after Vivien was born. Vivien grew up in a small house on Monica Street on Detroit's west side, where the lawns were kept neat despite everything falling apart around them, where neighbors knew each other's business but looked out for each other's children. Her mother worked 2 jobs, days at a dry cleaner where the chemical smell seeped into her clothes and hair, nights cleaning office buildings downtown. Vivien learned early what absence felt like. what it meant to come home to an empty house and make your own dinner at 8 years old. But here's what shaped her, what made her who she would become. Vivien was smart, not just book smart, though she was that too, reading at a 10th grade level when she was in 4th grade. She was observationally intelligent. She watched how money worked, how her mother counted bills on the kitchen table with hands that shook from exhaustion, how the landlord's expression changed when rent was 2 days late versus 2 weeks late. She noticed that the families who owned their homes walked differently than the families who rented. She saw that the women who drove nice cars didn't look tired all the time. One day, when Vivien was 11, she was in the library, her second home, the place she went after school every single day because it was warm and safe and full of possibilities. She found a magazine about successful women, black women specifically, who'd built businesses and fortunes. One article featured a real estate agent in Atlanta who'd started with nothing and now owned a brokerage firm. The woman wore a cream-colored suit, pearl earrings, and smiled like she'd never worried about a light bill in her life. Vivien tore that page out carefully, folded it, and put it in her pocket. That night, she taped it to the wall next to her bed. That image became her North Star. She told her mother, "I'm going to sell houses when I grow up." Lorraine, exhausted from a double shift, barely looked up from her dinner. "That's nice, baby." But Vivien wasn't making conversation. She was making a declaration. A promise to herself that she would never be tired like her mother. Never count change for bus fare. Never depend on a man who could just walk away. High school came, and Vivien excelled. Not because it was easy, but because she made it her religion. She worked part-time at a grocery store, saved every penny, dressed in second-hand clothes that she altered herself to look expensive. She learned to speak differently, smoothing out the Detroit accent that marked her as lower class. She watched how the teachers at her school who lived in the suburbs pronounced their words, how they held themselves. She wasn't trying to be white. She was trying to be successful. And she was smart enough to know that in America, those two things often looked similar to people with money and power. Her senior year, 1987, she applied to Wayne State University with a partial scholarship. She also applied for every grant, every work-study program, every possible source of funding. When the acceptance letter came, she cried. Actually cried for the first time since she was a child. Lorraine cried too, holding her daughter and saying, "You're going to have a better life than me. You're going to have everything." Wayne State University was where Vivien learned to navigate multiple worlds simultaneously. She worked the front desk at a hotel downtown, midnight to 8 a.m. shift, then went to classes, then studied, then did it all again. She lived off-campus in a tiny studio apartment she could barely afford, ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches, and still managed to make Dean's List every semester. She studied business administration with a focus on real estate. But more than that, she studied people. She watched how the wealthy hotel guests moved through the world, how they tipped, how they spoke to service workers, how they expected things to simply happen for them. She noticed that confidence was often more valuable than competence, that appearing successful was halfway to being successful. By her junior year, 1989, she'd started dressing better. Not expensive clothes, but carefully curated pieces from consignment shops that looked professional. She joined the Black Business Students Association, networked relentlessly, and landed an internship at a real estate office in Birmingham, one of Detroit's wealthiest suburbs. That internship changed everything. The agency was run by an older white man named Gerald Morrison, who saw something in Vivien. Maybe it was her hunger. Maybe it was her intelligence. Maybe he just needed someone willing to work harder than anyone else for half the pay. Whatever the reason, he hired her part-time during school and promised her a full-time position when she graduated. She graduated in May 1991, 22 years old, with a business degree and her real estate license already in hand. She'd studied for the exam while working full-time, passed it on her first try, and walked into that office ready to prove herself. The office had 12 agents. She was the only black person. She was the only woman under 40. She was the youngest by 15 years. And within 18 months, she was the top-selling agent in the firm. Vivien did this by outworking everyone. While other agents took weekends off, she showed houses. While they went home at 5 she stayed until 9 hours making calls. She learned the inventory better than anyone, memorized neighborhood statistics, could tell you school ratings and property tax histories from memory. She made herself indispensable. But there was a cost. By the time she was 25, in 1994, Vivien had no friends outside of work acquaintances, no social life, no hobbies. She dated occasionally, brief relationships with men who either felt threatened by her success or wanted to benefit from it. She learned to spot the users quickly. The ones who suggested she pay for dinner because she made more money anyway. The ones who had business ideas they needed her to fund. The ones who loved her independence right up until they wanted her to be available at their convenience. She learned that being a successful black woman meant existing in a strange limbo. Too successful for men who wanted traditional wives, not connected enough for men who'd grown up with wealth and wanted someone from their world, too focused on work to build the kind of friendships that required time and emotional availability. Her mother, Lorraine, noticed. In 1995, during Thanksgiving dinner, she said, "Baby, when are you going to settle down? Find a good man. Give me some grandbabies." Vivien, who'd just closed a deal on a $1 million property in Bloomfield Hills, felt something twist inside her. "I'm building my career, Mama. There's time for all that later." "Later has a way of becoming never," Lorraine said quietly. "I don't want you to wake up one day and realize you built a beautiful life with nobody to share it with." Those words stayed with Vivien, planted a seed of doubt that would grow over the next few years. Here's what you need to understand. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones told by strangers. They're the ones we tell ourselves. Subscribe now, because the next part of this story proves exactly why that matters. Vivien was 29 when she met Marcus. Let's call him Marcus Tremaine Jackson. The date was April 18, 1998, a Saturday, a real estate investment conference in Chicago. She'd driven down, paid her own way, looking to network and learn about commercial properties. Marcus was 34, and he had this presence that filled a room without demanding attention. He was about 5'9", stocky build, kept his hair cut low with a precise lineup, wore a goatee that was always perfectly trimmed. He dressed well, not flashy, but expensive. Tailored suits, quality watches, shoes that cost more than most people's car payments. They met during a breakout session on investment strategies. Vivien asked a question about tax implications, and Marcus, sitting 2 rows behind her, leaned forward and said, "That's the smartest question anyone's asked all day." During the lunch break, he found her. "I'm Marcus. I think we should talk shop over actual food instead of these sad conference sandwiches. There's a steakhouse 2 blocks away." She almost said no, but something about his directness, his confidence that she'd say yes without arrogance behind it, made her curious. Over lunch, Marcus told her he was a technology consultant, working with startups on systems integration and digital infrastructure. He traveled constantly, mostly to Ohio, where the tech scene was growing, but he was based in Detroit. He asked about her work, seemed genuinely impressed by her success, and had this way of listening like her words were the most interesting thing he'd heard all week. "You built all that yourself?" he asked, when she told him about going from intern to top agent. "No family connections, no seed money, just pure hustle?" "That's right," she said, and felt proud saying it. "That's beautiful," he said. "That's the American dream right there. Self-made woman." They talked for 2 hours. When the conference resumed, they exchanged business cards. He called her 3 days later. "I'm in Detroit this week. Can I take you to dinner?" And I mean dinner. Not some business lunch where we pretend we're not trying to impress each other. She laughed. "Where would we go?" "You pick. You know the city better than I do. Somewhere you've always wanted to go, but never had a reason to." She picked the Whitney, an elegant restaurant in a historic mansion, the kind of place she'd driven past 100 times, but never had occasion to visit. Marcus picked her up at her condo in Southfield, a beautiful 2-bedroom she'd purchased 2 years earlier, her first owned property. He showed up with flowers. Not roses, which would have been cliché, but calla lilies, elegant and unusual. "You seem like someone who appreciates things that are beautiful, but not obvious," he said when he handed them to her. Dinner was perfect. He ordered wine without being pretentious about it. Made her laugh with stories about difficult clients, asked thoughtful questions about her childhood, her mother, her dreams beyond real estate. When she told him about the magazine article she'd kept on her wall as a kid, he didn't laugh or minimize it. "You knew who you wanted to be," he said. "Most people spend their whole lives not knowing that. You had clarity at 11 years old. That's powerful." By the end of the night, sitting in his car outside her condo, Vivien felt something she hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Not just attraction, though that was there, but the possibility that maybe this could be something real. "Can I see you again?" Marcus asked. "Yes," she said. No games, no playing coy. Just yes. They dated for 6 months before he told her he loved her. It happened in her living room. November 1998. After a quiet dinner she'd cooked. He'd been spending more time in Detroit, less time traveling, and she'd noticed he left things at her place. A toothbrush, a change of clothes, his favorite coffee. "I love you, Vivien," he said, not during some grand romantic moment, but while they were washing dishes together. "I know that might seem fast to some people, but I'm 34 years old. I've dated enough to know when something is real. This is real." She dried her hands on a towel, turned to face him, and said, "I love you too." And she meant it. They married June 12, 1999. Small ceremony, just family and close friends, at a boutique hotel in downtown Detroit. Vivien wore a champagne-colored dress, simple and elegant, with pearls at her throat, and her hair swept into an updo. Marcus wore charcoal gray, with a deep red tie. Lorraine cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus's family, he explained, couldn't make it from Oregon where they lived, but they sent their blessing and an expensive crystal vase. Looking back later, Vivien would remember that detail. How none of his family came, how she never met them, never talked to them on the phone, never saw photos beyond the one picture he had of his parents. But in the moment, she was too happy to question it. Comment below, have you ever ignored a red flag because you wanted something to be true? Because what comes next shows exactly why those instincts matter. The first year was good. Marcus traveled to Ohio frequently for work, sometimes for a week at a time, and Vivien used that time to focus on her career. In 2000, she took a massive risk and opened her own firm, Morrison Real Estate Group. Just her and two other agents to start, working out of a small office in Southfield. Marcus was supportive, or seemed to be. He'd ask about her day, celebrate her successes, help her strategize on difficult clients, but he also started making small observations, little comments that weren't quite criticisms, but felt like corrections. Have you thought about changing your hair? I saw a woman at a conference with a shorter cut, and it looked so professional and polished. I think you'd look incredible with something like that. That dress is nice, but you know what would really make an impact? Something more fitted. You have a beautiful figure. You should show it off more. Maybe consider updating your look a little. Not because you don't look good. You do. But in real estate, image is everything, right? Vivien found herself slowly changing. She got a shorter haircut. She hired a personal trainer. She started getting regular facials, then Botox in her mid-30s, then fillers in her early 40s. Each change was small, individually justifiable, but collectively they represented a gradual reshaping of herself to match what she thought Marcus wanted. And he noticed. "You look incredible," he'd say after each modification. "Absolutely stunning. I'm a lucky man." The validation felt good. She told herself she was doing it for herself, for her confidence, for her career. But deep down, she knew she was doing it for him. The topic of children came up in stages, each conversation more definitive than the last. The first time was in 2001. Vivien was 32, and one of her clients, a woman about her age, was pregnant with her second child. Watching the woman glow with excitement, rubbing her belly, talking about nursery colors, Vivien felt something unexpected. Longing. That night, she brought it up with Marcus. They were having dinner at home, and she said casually, "Have you ever thought about having kids?" Marcus's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "I have thought about it. Quite a bit, actually. And I don't want them." He said it gently but firmly. "I know that might sound harsh, but I need to be honest with you. I don't want children. I love our life the way it is. The freedom we have, the ability to focus on our careers, to travel when we want, to just be us. Kids change all of that. They're expensive. They're exhausting. And honestly, I don't think I have the patience or desire to be a father." Vivien felt her throat tighten. "Never?" "Never," he confirmed. "I should have been clearer about this before we got married, and I'm sorry I wasn't. But I thought you felt the same way. You're so focused on your business, so driven. Can you really see yourself giving that up for diapers and preschool?" She couldn't, actually, or she told herself she couldn't. "No, I guess not. We don't need kids to be happy, Vivien. We have each other. That's enough, isn't it?" "Yes," she said. "That's enough." The conversation came up again in 2003, when Vivien turned 34. Again in 2005, when one of her agents went on maternity leave and came back glowing, talking about her baby like he'd invented happiness. Each time Marcus's answer was the same, delivered with the same gentle firmness. No children, no exceptions. By 2007, when Vivien was 38, she accepted it as fact. No children. It was a sacrifice, but every life required sacrifices. She threw herself deeper into work, expanded her firm to 5 agents, then 10, then 15. By 2009, Morrison Real Estate Group was one of the most successful black-owned firms in metropolitan Detroit. But late at night, sometimes Vivien would lie awake and wonder what it would have felt like to hold her own child. She'd push the thought away, remind herself of everything she'd built, everything she had. It was enough. It had to be enough. If this story is making you think about the compromises we make in relationships, don't just watch. Subscribe. Because the betrayal gets deeper, and you need to see how it ends. When they first married, Marcus suggested joint bank accounts. "We're partners," he said. "A team. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine." That's what marriage means. Vivien agreed, though she kept one personal account, a small safety net, the remnant of her childhood fear of being left with nothing. That account she never told him about. Everything else was shared. Marcus was good with money, or appeared to be. He handled their bills, managed their investments, set up retirement accounts. He had this way of explaining complex financial concepts in simple terms that made Vivien feel like she understood, even when she didn't quite follow all the details. "I set up a new investment account," he'd say. "Better returns, lower fees. I moved some money over from our main account." "How much?" she'd ask. "Just a few thousand. Nothing that'll impact our day-to-day. Trust me, this is good financial planning." And she did trust him. Why wouldn't she? He was her husband, her partner. The man who'd stood in front of their friends and family and promised to love and protect her. What Vivien didn't realize was that Marcus had structured their finances in a way that gave him primary control. The joint accounts required both signatures for major transactions, but he was listed as the primary account holder. When statements came, he reviewed them first. When tax documents arrived, he handled them. When questions arose, he had answers that sounded reasonable. By 2010, Vivien's firm was generating close to $500,000 annually in her personal income alone. She reinvested heavily in the business, but there was still substantial money flowing into their joint accounts. Money that Marcus managed. Money that increasingly seemed to disappear into investments Vivien never quite understood. "Where did that $15,000 go?" she asked once, reviewing a statement in 2012. "Ohio property investment," Marcus said smoothly. "Remember I told you about that commercial real estate opportunity? We're going in with 3 other investors. This is going to pay off big in a few years." "Can I see the paperwork?" "Of course. It's in my office at the Ohio apartment. I'll bring it next time I'm back." He never did. And Vivien, busy with her own business, eventually forgot to ask again. This pattern repeated for years. Money moving out of their accounts in increments large enough to matter, but small enough not to trigger immediate alarm. $2,000 here. $5,000 there. Occasionally, $10,000 or $15,000. Always with explanations. Always with promises of returns that never materialized. Vivien's mother, Lorraine, died in March 2013. Heart attack. Sudden and massive. She was 63 years old, still working at the dry cleaner because she refused to retire. Said she'd get bored sitting at home. Vivien was devastated. Lorraine had been her foundation, her reminder of why she worked so hard, proof that sacrifice could lead somewhere better. The funeral was small, dignified. Vivien cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was a child. Marcus was there, supportive, present. He held her during the service, helped organize the repast, made sure relatives had everything they needed. For a week, he was perfect. Then he was back in Ohio for work. Gone for 10 days. Vivien was left alone in their house, surrounded by her mother's things, drowning in grief with nobody to share it with. Something shifted after that. Vivien started noticing things she'd ignored before. How Marcus was gone more than he was home. How his business trips to Ohio were lasting longer, happening more frequently. How, when he was home, he was distracted. Always on his phone. Always somewhere else mentally, even when he was sitting right next to her. Their physical intimacy, never passionate but consistent in the early years, became almost non-existent. Months would pass between encounters, and when they did happen, they felt perfunctory, obligatory. "Are we okay?" Vivien asked him one night in 2014. She was 45 years old, successful beyond her childhood dreams, and profoundly lonely. "Of course we're okay," Marcus said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you're never here. And when you're here, you're not really here." "I'm working, Vivien, just like you work. You understand that, don't you?" She did understand, so she stopped asking. By 2016, they were living parallel lives that occasionally intersected. Marcus would come home for a few days. They'd have dinner, exchange pleasantries about work, sleep in the same bed without touching, and then he'd be gone again. Vivien told herself this was normal, that this was what long-term marriage looked like, that passion faded and comfort replaced it. But she didn't feel comfortable. She felt alone. For her 48th birthday in 2017, Marcus gave her a spa weekend and a diamond tennis bracelet. Beautiful, expensive gifts. Gifts you give someone you want to impress, not someone you know intimately enough to know what would make them truly happy. She thanked him, wore the bracelet, went to the spa, and felt nothing. By early 2019, Vivien had started thinking seriously about divorce, not because of any dramatic incident, but because of the accumulation of small absences, tiny disconnections, the slow realization that she was 50 years old and living with a stranger. She'd built a successful business, owned a beautiful home, had financial security that would carry her comfortably through retirement. But she was lonely in a way that hurt physically, like a constant low-grade pain she'd learned to live with. In February 2019, she made a decision. She was going to start really looking at their finances. Not just casually reviewing statements, but actually examining where money had been going for the past decade. She told herself it was due diligence, preparing for a potential divorce, protecting her assets. What she found confused her. There were regular transfers to an account in Ohio. Not huge amounts, but consistent. $1,500 to $2,000 monthly, going back years. When she added it up, it was close to $250,000 over 12 years. She called Marcus. "I'm looking at our bank statements. There are transfers to Ohio I don't recognize. What are those for?" There was a pause, just a beat too long. "Those are for the business investment. I told you about the commercial property." "For 12 years? We've been paying into an investment for 12 years with no returns?" "Real estate development takes time, Vivien. You know that better than anyone." "I want to see the paperwork. All of it. Property deeds, investment agreements, everything." Another pause. "I don't have all of that here. It's with my business partner in Ohio. I'll get it for you." "When?" "Soon. I promise." He never did. Vivien hired a forensic accountant, quietly, without telling Marcus. She wanted to know exactly where their money had gone before she filed for divorce. She wanted to protect herself. The accountant came back with preliminary findings in early March. "The transfers are going to a personal checking account, not a business account. An account in Marcus's name, but at an address in Columbus, Ohio, that you've never heard of." "What does that mean?" "This isn't an investment," the accountant said. "This looks like he's maintaining a second household." Vivien felt the room tilt. "What do you mean, a second household?" "I mean these payments line up with mortgage payments, utility bills, daily living expenses. Someone is living at that address, and your husband is paying for it." The accountant couldn't tell her more without deeper investigation, possibly legal action. But Vivien's mind was racing. a second household in Ohio, where Marcus spent more time than he spent at home. She made a decision. She was going to confront him on her birthday, March 15th, during the small party she'd planned. She wanted to look him in the eye, in front of people who knew them, and ask him to explain what the hell was going on. She had no idea that she wouldn't have to ask. The truth was already on its way to her door. Drop a comment. Would you confront someone publicly or privately? Because what happens next shows why sometimes the truth finds you before you find it. Don't miss this. Subscribe now. Vivien turned 50 on Friday, March 15th, 2019. She planned a small gathering at her home in Southfield. Nothing elaborate. About 20 people, agents from her firm, a few longtime clients who'd become friends, some neighbors. Catered dinner. Good wine. An attempt to mark a milestone that felt more heavy than celebratory. She'd spent the day at the salon getting her hair done, a short, sophisticated burgundy cut that made her feel powerful. She wore a deep burgundy dress, fitted and elegant, with her signature pearls. She looked good, and knew it, even if she felt hollow inside. Marcus had been home for 3 days, which was unusual. He seemed nervous, jumpy, constantly checking his phone. Vivien assumed he knew she was onto him, that he'd somehow found out about the forensic accountant. She was almost relieved. The confrontation was coming, and at least then she'd have answers. He dressed casually for the party. Dark jeans, a black designer shirt, one of his expensive chains visible at his collar, a fitted cap. He looked like he was trying too hard to be young, cool, relevant. Vivien noticed, but didn't comment. Guests started arriving around 6:30. The house filled with conversation, laughter, music playing softly in the background. Vivien played hostess, accepting birthday wishes, making small talk, all while watching Marcus out of the corner of her eye. He kept checking his phone every few minutes, glancing at the screen, his face getting progressively more tense. At 7:45, the doorbell rang. Vivien was in the kitchen arranging dessert plates. One of her agents, Monique, answered the door. Then Vivien heard it. A woman's voice, loud enough to carry over the music. "Where is he? Where's Trey?" Trey. Nobody called Marcus Trey. Vivien walked toward the foyer, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name yet. She rounded the corner and stopped dead. A woman stood in her entryway. She was maybe 45, full-figured, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, her hair in long box braids, a nose ring catching the light. She looked tired, stressed, and furious. Behind her were 4 children, ranging from teenager to elementary age, all looking uncomfortable and confused. The woman's eyes scanned the room until they locked on Marcus, who'd gone completely pale. "There you are," she said, her voice shaking with rage or grief or both. "Thought you could hide forever, didn't you?" Vivien found her voice. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" The woman turned to her, and Vivien saw her expression shift from anger to something that looked almost like pity. "My name is Simone. Simone Jackson. This is Marcus Jackson, right? Or does he go by Marcus Tremaine here? He goes by different middle names depending on which family he's with." She gestured to the children behind her. "These are our kids. Trey Jr., he's 16. Kamaya, she's 14. Brandon just turned 12. And Zuri is 8. The words didn't make sense. Vivien's brain couldn't process them. "What are you talking about? Marcus doesn't have children." Simone laughed, sharp and bitter. "He doesn't have children? Lady, he has 4 of them. We've been married for 13 years. We live in Columbus. He's there most of the month, comes home to us, plays dad at soccer games and parent-teacher conferences, and apparently spends his spare time here playing house with you." The room had gone completely silent. Every conversation stopped. Everyone was staring. Vivien looked at Marcus. "Tell her she's wrong. Tell her this is insane." Marcus's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Simone pulled out her phone, started showing pictures. Marcus at a child's birthday party, wearing a party hat. Marcus at a high school graduation, arm around the teenage boy. Marcus at a family dinner table, surrounded by all 4 kids. Recent photos. Photos from this year, last year, going back over a decade. "He told me he was a technology consultant, that he traveled for work," Simone said, her voice breaking. "I believed him for 13 years. You know what finally made me question it? His girlfriend felt guilty and told me the truth." "Girlfriend?" Vivien's voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. A woman stepped forward from the crowd of guests, tears streaming down her face. One of Vivien's newer agents, Shanice, young and talented and clearly devastated. "I'm so sorry," Shanice whispered. "I didn't know he was married to either of you. He told me he was divorced, that he had kids from a previous marriage but was single. We've been seeing each other for 6 months, and last month I saw photos on his phone that didn't match his story. When I pushed him on it, he couldn't keep the lies straight. I had to tell her." She gestured to Simone. "I couldn't live with knowing." Simone nodded. "She called me 2 weeks ago, told me everything. At first I didn't believe her, thought she was some crazy woman trying to break up my marriage. But then I started looking, really looking at our bank accounts, at his credit cards, at our tax returns, and I found you.